Those
Yeah.
kinds of things are the things that point out to you this is how it ought to be for everybody all the time.
75%.
Okay, I'm about to introduce you to the incumbent senator from Senate District 36. His name is John Hoffman. He's been the senator from 36 since 2012. But just because you ought to be impressed a little bit, John, hello, before we begin.
Nancy.
Senator Hoffman was appointed by the United States Secretary of Education to the Federal Interagency Coordinating Council, assisting and advising cabinet members on their response to children and families birth to 8 years of age, specifically those with special health care needs. That before you became a Minnesota senator from District 36. And thank you for your service. Thank you for you. I'm so happy to meet you, Senator Hoffman.
It's awesome to be here with you, Nancy, because, you know, as soon as I saw you, I immediately started thinking, oh my God, all these infomercials, all the news that you were part of. And of course, you know, I'm married to a
broadcaster,
broadcaster
yes.
who had for years started here in the Twin Cities at the old WLOL and then did morning radio out in San Francisco and ended up at a CBS affiliate after that. And then we decided to move home because we had a birth of a child, and our daughter is 23 years old, and that's what brought us back to Minnesota. And hence, in 2001, I was appointed to a 3-year commission out in DC. So I would leave Minnesota, go out for a week, come back. You know, it was like every other month it would be gone for a week on that stuff. But there was a piece of law, 94-142, that we were helping people understand what their rights, roles, and responsibilities and obligations were in that law. So that's absolutely what got me into this whole policy wanting to do thing.
How did they find you in the first place?
So there was reauthorization. At every 5 years, a law that has been passed gets reauthorized. And I was appearing to talk about one little section of that law, which was the birth to 3, and it was called Part C, and that was a law that was established in 1986 called Public Law 99-457. If you guys want to look that up, go ahead and do it.
You're not giving a quiz later, are you?
I won't. That's
okay.
So I was testifying in front of the Assistant Secretary and the Secretary of OSERS, and ended up getting done with my testimony and got to meet him afterwards.
Oh.
And he said, "Yeah, I'd like to submit your name to be in the administration to be one of 7 citizens nationwide that advises and assists cabinet members on the reauthorization that is now coming up." And I kind of went, "Yeah, whatever." And I gave him, my information. I thought, "There's no way they're going to pick me." Lo and behold, this letter shows up in the mail.
How
and it
thrilling.
was signed. It was awesome.
Thrilling,
Rodney
Senator.
Page in the Bush administration signed me into that, and it was like my first meeting. I went out there, and I was just like,
There's many other things to talk about, but
Yeah.
we can't leave this just yet.
Okay.
You went out there and you did this for a period of time. What's out there like? You go to meetings where, with whom? Is it cooperative? Is it contentious? Is it political? What?
It was supposed to be cooperative because in that law that I talked about, there are 3 C's that need to exist: comprehensive, coordinated, and collaborative. And that's written within the law right there. And there was also a mandate from the administration that said you must, there was none of this you should or you may kind of thing, but you must be cooperative and collaborative in your work, specifically regarding that aspect of the law. And we took that wholeheartedly. And at the time, No Child Left Behind was being discussed in the Department of Education. Mm. And we're the ones that our committee said, well, what are you going to do about people with disabilities that aren't going to get to the 100%? How are you going to start to do reasonable accommodations, which again, reasonable accommodations fits within a law, the Rehab Act of 1973. And so we had to educate those folks, that were writing laws at the time about how you're going to do a reasonable accommodation. And it worked. I mean, that's what we were supposed to be doing, and we did that. So
it must have been so interesting.
Yeah, it was absolutely interesting. It was something that I came back and was done with my commission in 2004. And then at that time, Denise Dietrich, who was on the Anoka-Hennepin School Board, was elected to the House of Representatives, and that had an opening on the school board. So I thought, all right, this is right up my alley. I'm going to apply to finish her term, and along with 8 other people applied, and they ended up picking me, and then I ran for election. Nobody knew who I was, but found out early on that I could bring a lot to the local education group based upon my knowledge. And one, for example, If you're doing medically related services, you can bill third-party pay. In this case, you could bill Medicaid or insurance companies. And at the time, it was just focusing on Medicaid. And the district, which is the largest school district in the state, wasn't billing Medicaid for medically related services. And it was all within the structure of the law. I was the one now educating the local folks how to do that. And they weren't doing that at the time. And it was just, by getting that conversation going, they were able to recoup $2.6 million a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's, little stuff like that.
Oh, wow. Now, you ran in 2012.
I did run for Senate in 2012. Then I was on the school board for 8 years.
And then, of course, again in 2016.
Yes.
And now you're up for re-election.
I am.
And really, aren't you kind of from an area that should not necessarily just go for a Democrat, no matter how attractive you are?
That is correct. It is a 50-50 district still in the state of Minnesota. The seat we won in 2012 was controlled by a person that was a Tea Party individual.
Yes.
Very ultra-conservative Tea Party.
How did you swing that pendulum?
I was mad. I was absolutely mad because there's two things that happened. Number one, they kicked the can down the road. They borrowed money they made school districts borrow money from the state, right? Instead of the state balancing their budget, they said, okay, districts, we're going to pay you, but we're going to pay you maybe in 5 years. The districts then were on the hook to borrow. It was $2.6 billion, right? That upset me. And then the other thing that upset me was this not listening to the fact that there were 20,000 union members within Senate District 36, and the person that in 2012 was really for right to work, which takes away your right to go ahead and bargain, your right to form a union, your right to, well, I want overtime, I want to be able to have a 40-hour work week. It'd be nice to have a weekend off. It'd be nice to get some health insurance, right? And so I was really running on the fact that we can't let this happen. And so it was really grassroots, local things that local control, local issues that really got me into that. And we won. In 2012, I got endorsed by Walter Mondale and Arnie Carlson.
And of course, Arnie Carlson, a former Republican, who was our state auditor and then our governor. And somewhere along the way, Arnie said, this is not the party I thought I was a part of. And boy, he's not in the Republican Party any longer.
And it's funny you bring that up because when you look at health insurance, Minnesota had a response to health insurance coverage called Minnesota Care.
Yes.
Right? It's saying, okay, if you got a financial problem, we're going to let you, give you a little incentive here to get some health insurance that isn't going to be on government, but rather it's going to be actual health insurance that is here, Minnesota Care. Arnie Carlson was the one who set that up.
Yep.
I mean, lo and behold, there it was. So thank you, Arnie Carlson, for getting Minnesota above the curve when it came to the ACA. I mean, it was our response. And so what scares me now is on the federal level, they're talking about, lessening and lowering that standard. I hope that Minnesota keeps Arnie Carlson's standards in place and that we continue to expand. And here's the other thing. If we would have just expanded Minnesota Care, instead of giving the HMOs back a couple years ago, remember that?
Yep.
HMOs were addressing 5% of the population. We gave them like $400 million. It's didn't change, right? If we would have just expanded that 5% within Minnesota Care, the cost to you as a taxpayer and me as a taxpayer and the rest of the state, it would have been $15 to $16 million. Just to expand what Arnie Carlson had set up. Cost-effective, efficient, and accessible.
And partisan politics decides they're not going to do something that is for the advantage of all of the citizens, no matter what party they are a part of. And of course, Senator, you serve in a Senate that is dominated, not by a big number, but enough, by the Republican Party. We have seen so much when we see the news and a shot of the floor or a shot of conversations. It's contentious over there. Any hope that it's going to become less?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. And I'll never forget the first door I knocked on in 2012. A gentleman yelled from the back of his house, "I don't care what political party you're from, will you just stop finger pointing and bickering and get something done?"
Thank you.
and I said, yeah. And so I listened to that. And as I heard that more and more, it's like, all right, how do you deliver for your community? And Highway 10, the Mill Pond in Champlin, the dam in Champlin, Highway 169 and 101st, Hanson Boulevard, that was all done because of bipartisan work. It was the first time in the history that our area got some really good state funding to take care of some infrastructure needs, right? But it wasn't about me. It was about reaching over to the other side and saying, this is what our constituency needs. This is what our communities need. Let's do this.
Since you've been there, has that gotten a little better or worse?
91% of my bills are bipartisan.
Yes, that's why you're great. Thank you, Senator. Wow.
You know, Ronald Reagan, who I just don't, I don't want to brag about Ronald Reagan because there's a lot of things he did that we're not happy with, right?
He busted the unions. Should we talk about that?
Absolutely. I'm mad at that.
A guy who was president of the Screen Actors Guild who benefited from all of the things that the unions can give you, and he busted them? Are you kidding me? Okay, next. Please continue, Senator.
He said, if you agree with me 80% of the time, it doesn't make you my enemy, it makes you my ally. And I thought, 80%, I can do better than that. And then I thought about Jim Ramstad, who I served on his Education Advisory Committee.
I was a fan of Jim Ramstad.
Oh, still am.
Voted for Jim Ramstad.
Absolutely, a lot of people.
Respected what he stood for and how he did it.
Isn't it amazing that in his opinion, he would say, look, John, when I was on the Federal Interagency Coordinating Council, I used to stop in there just to give him updates and give his staff updates, and just because I was part of his Education and Advisory Committee. And I'll never forget him saying this, and it just resonates in my head even today. Health and Human Services and education. Leave your ego out in the hallway. This is a nonpartisan, this is a pragmatic, common sense discussion. Keep it focused. He always said that. And I went, wow, that makes sense. And it's always resonating in my mind. How do you make this a common sense, nonpartisan discussion? And that's Jim Ramstad. That's who he was. It's who he is to this day. And I wish we had posted that. Same thing with Dave Durenberger. Look at the ADA, right?
Love Dave Durenberger. He was a Republican. In that, they're the two Republicans I voted for my entire life, and you name both of them. But they didn't look Republican to me in what they stood for and how they approached it. And the decency that they brought to this is for the citizens. This is not a partisan issue, as you already outlined with Jim. And my goodness, we're missing that. Everything is a partisan issue. The sky is blue. No, it's not.
It's red.
Wear a mask so you don't die. No, if you wear a mask.
No, my First Amendment right.
Yeah, if you wear a mask, you're anti whoever it is.
You know, it's funny you say that because Durenberger brought the DD Act, and he also brought the ADA. But he was the chief author of the ADA was Tom Harkin. Of course, Bobby Silverstein wrote that. And again, Bobby Silverstein, wow, amazing. He also wrote Public Law 99-457. So that was
the one that brought you to Washington.
The one that brought me to Washington.
How about that?
And it was Harkin and Durenberger collaboratively together passed one of the biggest bills 30 years ago, right? And Dave Durenberger said this because he looked at how Jim Abler, who's a Republican from Anoka, and I'm a Democrat from Champlin, Coon Rapids, Brooklyn Park, and so what, right? Abler always says that, so what? And Durenberger said, we did that because that's what people expected us to do, work together and get things done. And he said, that's what you guys are doing.
Boy, do we need those voices everywhere. Minnesota, nationally.
Yeah.
Talking to you makes me appreciate you so much. You're just wonderful. Let's talk a little bit more about you and leave politics for a moment.
Sure.
Because as a woman, I heard you say something, maybe it was before we went on the air together here, that I went, oh. You said, my wife was very successful on the air at WLOL Radio. Then she got an offer in San Francisco, and I followed her to San Francisco. And then she got a job out of San Francisco in Des Moines, Iowa, and I followed her. Now, I love you because it's interesting. I still of that generation where a lot of people would say, what do you mean he followed her? And it tells us an awful lot about you and the relationship you have with your wife and the humanity that brings to your governance.
You know, it was one of those things. I was running a music store in St. Paul. I was the drum shop. I was managing this large drum shop and playing some music and having fun and doing what I was doing, and then all of a sudden, poof, WLOL gets sold to
Whoever.
public radio or
Yeah.
whatever. And so her agent has this opening, and she got to be part of this Engelman, Gunn, and the Fox. That was the name of their morning show. Ron Engelman was this huge voice, and if you Google Ron Engelman, you see the Waco stuff. It's all there. And her other, Mark Gunn, who is still doing radio to this day in Louisville, Kentucky. He runs a radio station in Louisville, and he's a dear friend. He's a brother from another mother, and that's, I mean, seriously. I mean, he talks to Yvette all the time. We talk, and it's like, yeah, it was follow out there, and she was doing what she was doing and did that in Des Moines. And in 10 years in Des Moines, she had a 21 share as a morning radio show person.
Doesn't mean anything to them, but
yeah.
that's breaking the bank in air. Nobody gets a 21 share.
Nobody gets a 21 share, yeah.
Before Jeff Strait, the wonderful producer of all of this, tells us to get out of the room because we're almost done. I don't want to be too personal, but one of the things that might color some of your approaches to things, certainly medical care, is that you had an intensely personal, difficult, challenging health situation within your own family. And you want to be sure everyone who faces a challenge can have care and feel safe.
Absolutely, and that's what drives me is when you look at unchecked HMOs, right? And the battle with the HMOs, it's terrible. I'm going to pick on Health Partners for 2 seconds. Top 22 executives pull $32 million a year in
but they're
salary.
nonprofit.
But
How
they're
can
a
you say that?
nonprofit, Nancy.
What are you saying? Are you sure?
Yes, I produced it on the Senate floor. It was like, come on, folks. We've lost touch in that, which brings back this thing. The Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe have a single-payer healthcare system in Minnesota, and it works.
It works.
It absolutely works.
They're our role model.
They are absolutely, and I brag about that all the time, saying we should go statewide. They figured it out in central Minnesota. They've seen their diabetes rates drop down. They've seen actual care get there with primary care clinics. They help the Mille Lacs healthcare system up there. It's like everybody is benefiting from this single-payer healthcare system that they're putting together, and it's working. Healthcare
saves everybody money, besides the fact that it is the only humane option available to us.
Oh, yeah.
John Hoffman, is this going to be a tough battle? Is it pretty easy, or are you really being challenged now?
It's never easy. I mean, my first 2 election campaigns, if you look at the records, there's probably over $1 million spent on the campaigns in 2012 and 2016. Tough. It's always going to be tough.
Your wife was in this business, so you learned well. You've got 30 seconds to give us the John Hoffman commercial. Why do we need you back where you are now?
Nancy, I'm glad you asked me that question, because 4 years ago, you told me to stop finger pointing, bickering, and get something done. And I listened. 91% of my bills are bipartisan, and collaboratively I worked together to get some smart policies in place and some funding in place for our local area. From Highway 610 to Highway 169 and 101st, all the way up to the Armstrong Bridge, and as well as the Hanson Boulevard Bridge and this beautiful Champlin Mill Pond Dam. It took bipartisan support. It took working together. I still believe that together we can get things done for everybody.
Senator John Hoffman, he's been there since 2012. For goodness sakes, let's keep you where you are. I am so happy to meet you. Everybody, wear your mask. Vote for John Hoffman.
I got it.
Okay. Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Democratic Visions is handcrafted by volunteers from Eden Prairie, Hopkins, Minnetonka, Edina, and Bloomington. Watch us on select cable systems and on our YouTube channel. This is Carol Sundstrom.